Hello, everyone. Good evening, wherever you are joining us. And we are all the way visiting to USA. Peace of Christ be with you, Jay Smith. How are you doing?
Well, pretty good, thank you.
What's happening, Jay? You've been
Oh,
for decades, maybe years, let's say 4 years. You are talking about Muhammad, and then you come up with the opinions that Muhammad is not exist. You came up with the opinions that we cannot trust the Hadith. And now, Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, Mr. Horse in the narrative, is coming alongside of you and supporting you, seems. What do you think what's happening?
I mean, this is a real gift, isn't it? It was just a week ago, exactly a week ago today, back on the 9th of July, that he had this, this, he was being interviewed by this group. Let me bring it up. I forget the name of the group. Do you know what they are? They're called, here, I got it here. They're called Skepsis Islamica, and it's two people, Roxana Irana and Tehran Pool, who are very academic, and they like to bring academics up from an Islamic standpoint and talk about academia and Islam. So they brought up Yasir Qadhi. I absolutely needed to bring up Yasir Qadhi because now the question that they were talking about was not what we're going to talk about. They were the entire interview was about understanding Salafism.
So it's that Yasir Qadhi recently published a book. It's actually a very good book. I shouldn't be saying this as a Christian, but it is very, very good book. Buy it, read it. It's very helpful. So he's been going through interviews from to the different platforms, and this platform is actually interviewing him about Salafism, about his book, because once upon a time he was Salafi, and he's now out of Salafi group. So this is one of those interviews. So like he's promoting his book, also kind of just unpacking what was Salafism all about stuff. Very interesting things he's been discussing under this topic last couple of weeks. So in this interview, interesting question came up.
Yeah, and this came up about an hour and 40 minutes into the interview. And I didn't know about it until you told me about it. And then other people, Chris from Speakers Corner put up a great video yesterday. Or no, maybe it was earlier today. And then you put one up as well. The two of you put up your videos on just this small section, maybe about 5 or 7 sections. When after they've gone through this whole thing with Salafism, one of the questions that came up from Roxana Irani, and you're going to show that, her question concerning what do we do with, what do the Salafis do with everything they're dependent on has to be based on a historical context. And what do we do with historical criticism? Now, let me just give you a background as to why I wanted to talk to you about this, because not only because of his answer, but because of what's happening right now. In just the last 2 weeks, a little over a week ago, I was in California and I did a large talk, about 2-hour talk at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, on just this question, responding to videos that were put up by a fellow named Rabin Ibrahim saying that historical criticism is bonkers. I mean, he says it's the weakest of all criticisms, and that no one would listen to no Muslim. They will laugh at you if you were even to bring up something as ridiculous as Muhammad didn't exist. And that was great that he put that up there because I was able to respond to it. Now here, the same week that I'm responding to his 2 videos from April, you have Yasir Qadhi coming up and supporting me and supporting exactly what I'm trying to say. And that is everything we know about this guy named Muhammad. This guy, Muhammad, is based on accounts that have nothing to do with anybody living at that time, anybody that knew him or saw him or heard him. So here we're basing everything we know. In fact, that's 2 billion Muslims, are basing everything they know on someone who never saw him, on people who wrote about him but never heard him. But they are so sure that he did exist. So let's go ahead and run that, because this is the question. If someone did exist historically, there are 4 things that have to be required to support that individual. Number 1, they have to have been referred to by name. Number 2, they have to have lived in the place that they are supposedly living. Number 3, they have to have done what people say they did do, and number four, that have to do in the time period that supposedly all these events happened. So in this case, the man has to be a man named Muhammad who comes from the city of Mecca, who received a book called the Qur'an and became the model for that book. And all of this happened before 632. Those are the four criteria that what all historians demand of anybody who lived at any time. Now, it's not to say that we have to have an exhaustive reference to all four of those areas. What we do need is just one reference, just one reference to a man named Muhammad living in a place called Mecca, receiving the Qur'an in before the time of 632 when he dies. Okay, that's all we're asking. So here comes the whole problem with Salafi that these people are bringing up. And of course, in order for Salafism and all this viewpoint of what Muhammad said and did, in order for that to happen, you have to have records of it. You have to have somebody who was there, either seeing that man, saying those things in that place and at that time. The people that you need to do that have to be eyewitnesses, right? That's what we would demand of Jesus Christ. We needed eyewitnesses. We do have eyewitnesses. We have John and we have Matthew. What Muslims would call that is Sahabas. The Sahaba would be the eyewitnesses. So the Sahaba are those people who are actually there seeing Muhammad, seeing what he did, and hearing what he said. So the Sahaba would have written it down. And of course, when people say, well, no, they didn't know how to, of course they do how to read and write. In fact, we're now finding out what we just found in the last week, that Muhammad had 65 secretaries. I kid you not just Zayd ibn Thabit that I always thought. They are now actually, Muslims are all actually coming out with 65 names. We have all the names of the 65 secretaries of Muhammad. So obviously, what do secretaries do? They write down what the Prophet said and what the Prophet did. So if that is the case, there must be some documentation for that. So let's go ahead and open up and let's look at this, because she's asking a very good question. If the Salafis really believe in what this man said and what he did and how he's the model for all of mankind, and certainly for all Muslims, then where is the historical record for this? And what is historical criticism going to say about this record? Now, later on in the interview, Yasir Qadhi is going to make a distinction between the Qur'an and the traditions. When he says hadith, he's really meaning all the four genre of traditions. So he's referring to the hadith, the sirah, the tafsir, and the tariq. So he's not making the distinction at this point. He's just referring in one blanket statement as hadith, okay? Just so we don't get confused on that. But go ahead, Hatun, what have you found, and let's see what they're now saying.
Yeah, let me just say hi to people, because I was just like chatting you, kind of already introduced the topic. So it's good to have you in the chat, brothers, sisters, friends, guests, or enemies. So we are going to go through Yasir Qadhi's video, short part of it. It's approximate between 4 minutes to 7 minutes. And then after that, we will go through Jay's slides to make his case, whether who is this kind of, let's say, prophet of Islam is or was.
Hatun, can we just go through the first roughly 2 minutes first? Just stop after about 1 minute and 50 seconds.
Yes.
Because that's one category that I want to talk about. And then from there, we can go up to 3 minutes and 14 seconds. And then we get into the really juicy material after 3 minutes.
Yes, we will do that. Patience is virtue. Patience. And those of you who are joining us in the chat, please tag DCCI Ministries to your comments and questions on the topic. I am going to bring them up to Jay. So let's first bring our attention to video Jay Simith is talking about. This is taken from, let's put it up here.
Skepsis Islamica.
Yeah, so we are going to use it in the intention of critique and, I don't know, maybe like use it as a complementary critique and education purposes. So in case, I remember when Yasir Qadhi talked about holes in the narrative, he was giving me copyrights after copyrights. So I just wanted to make sure that we are using this video in intention of critique and education purposes. So I will start from here, Jay, and then you tell me to stop, and then we stop, okay?
Future of Salafism and post-Salafism and its approach to theology and source criticism. I think one of the main things it has to engage with, and something that we engage with a lot on this channel, is historical critical scholarship that's occurring within Western academia and in Islamic studies more broadly. One example that I think is very relevant is one of the most notable scholars in Quranic studies, employing the historical critical method, Nikolai Sinai, has concluded in his most recent book that actually the Salafi approach to the interpretation of the divine attributes is the one that is most in line with the clear reading of the Quranic text, and has even referred to Ibn Taymiyyah as an exemplary scholar in this regard. On the other hand, in the Western Academy, we have a very skeptical approach to the Hadith corpus and its ability to tell us anything really about the Prophet and actually what he did and said, which appears to be diametrically opposed to the Salafi theological emphasis on the Hadith canon. How do you think this sort of academic scholarship, and also its increasing accessibility to lay believers, will affect or influence the continued development of Salafi or post-Salafi thought?
That is a very difficult question because it's very sensitive, and because there's no easy answer, and because we are witnessing this in live time. It's a very difficult question.
Let me just pause here, Jay. I know you didn't want me to pause, but if you remember the holes in the narrative interview, that was very difficult question too.
Yeah,
He
this
said,
is kind of
he said it's not easy answer in that interview, and then now he's saying exactly the same thing. That means people keep ears what he's gonna say next.
okay. Let me just say also, isn't this interesting? That we call the standard Islamic narrative, or holes in the narrative interview number 1. This is holes in the narrative interview number 2.
Yeah.
So this is what is 1.0. This is now 2.0. Again, you can see the exact same problem he had there, he's going to have here, and it's really, you're going to see there are. To be fair, I'm glad I'm not in his shoes. I wouldn't know what to do with what he's being posed right here. Go ahead. Let's see what he says.
Also, for those of you who are not that much familiar with the words, so when he's talking about Salafis, he's thinking about Ibn Taymiyyah. In today's circle, so when we say Salafi Muslims, think about Mohammed Hijab and his team. Adnan Rashid will be in that group as well. So those are the individuals in today's world.
Very radical Muslims.
Or very messed up Muslims who needs Jesus.
And it is a question that I myself am grappling with at a personal level, at a believing level, and as an academic, and as a preacher and teacher. Without a doubt, studying Islam in the madrasa and then studying in the academy has shaped me. And I've spoken about this in a lot more detail. I have a lecture online, if you're interested. It's called Between the Madrasa and the Academy. And I go over and I highlight that there's good and bad in both. And one of our problems is that most people in the madrasa and most people in the academy are refusing to acknowledge the good of the other. And they only concentrate on the negatives of the other. And as somebody who's lived in both and is still involved to this day in both, I still attend, AMJA conferences I'm presenting and the other conferences I attend, and I still present papers, and I just published a book. This is my monograph. Had I still been in the academy, this would have got me my professorship. Alhamdulillah, I'm not in the, I don't need to do that. I resigned. I resigned because of the pressure in the academy. I resigned because I can't speak about Israel in the academy. I resigned because my morality is subjugated to public opinion and polls. I can't preach in the mosque if I'm a member of the academy. My preaching of the mosque will impact my position in the academy. That's nonsensical to the academy, but that is the reality, right? So I am not a fan of creating animosity between these two strands. I actually believe it is important that both of them recognize that each one has much to offer the other. And I speak as somebody who's traversed both of them and respects both of them. There are also areas where we're going to have to agree to disagree. And we should be brave enough to just acknowledge it and move on. The origin of the Qur'an is one of them. I am a Muslim. When I'm preaching and teaching, I will use the Qur'an as evidence, end of story. When I'm presenting an academic paper, I understand for my audience, the Qur'an is not an evidence. I understand this. Doesn't mean I don't believe it in my life, but I will not then use it in the same way. and it'll become third person. Well, the Quran states this, whereas in a lecture I'll say Allah says. It's the same thing, but how you phrase it and the utilization is going to be slightly different. So in some areas, we're going to have to agree to disagree. As you're aware, and I think you have in your channel interviewed such people as well.
Did you want to make any comment at this stage, Jay?
Okay, so what he's doing here, and bless his heart, he is trying to be as honest as possible, and he's trying to show that there is a real dilemma for men in his position. He's going to continue on and say why specifically. He's talking about the madrasa versus academia. Those are the two different, the two dichotomous groups. He said the same thing with Muhammad Hijab when he talked about you in the East versus me in the West. You in the standard narrative, which you represent Muhammad Hijab, versus myself, I have to represent academia here in the United States. So he made the same distinction in that interview, but he's making it much more of he's defining it much better in this interview. And here's the dilemma. And we're going to go on, so I don't want to take thunder from him. He's going to exactly explain that, because he's going to say, what are these two groups? On this side is the madrasa. Madrasa stands for traditional Islam. Stands for 99% of all Muslims in the world today, including himself, including those three right there. On this side, however, is the academia. Now, I can't say for these two people that are at the top, Roxana and Tehran, where they stand on this, but I'm hearing that they are academics. So I would suggest they probably may be on this side, and that's why he has to be careful what he says to them, just because their channel is called Skepticism of Islam. They're skeptics of Islam. So here he's caught in this dilemma, and he's trying his best. This is why it's such a hard dilemma for him. How do you stand in both camps and yet be relevant to both camps? Now, he's going to come to a conclusion in this video. This is what's going to be great. But we're jumping the gun. Let's go ahead, and as he defined these two camps, and he's going to show us that he is probably one of the best to speak to this issue, because he's been at two of the best schools in the world in both of these camps. Go ahead and play the video.
Many of the modern academics love to discuss the origin of the Quran, right? Of like the parallels of other, like the Alexander story, other stories, right? And their goal here, even if it's not explicit, is very clear. Their goal is to illustrate that the Prophet ﷺ was very crafty, very ingenious, that he tapped into all of these legends and then he constructed the Quran, right? That is an inherent bias of the Western Academy, because they're refusing to acknowledge the theological presumption that we have. And that is, the Quran is inspiration from Allah. I believe this. And therefore, that type of talk will just not resonate with me, because I'm not. So we have to agree to disagree. Hadith is another area. We're going to have to agree to disagree. There is no. Now, I hope there is, but as of yet, as somebody who's my undergraduate was in the College of Hadith. So I specialize.
Okay, can we stop there?
And
stop there, ma'am.
It is said, and I'm not just saying.
Okay, now here is something that he has to be careful of. He's making two distinctions, and he's saying that they are parallel. No, they're not. He is saying that in academia will be over here, and Islamic Madrasa will be over here. He's saying that these two cannot agree when it comes to Quran, because they start from a different presupposition. The presupposition over here for the Muslims is this is eternal. The Quran is eternal. Therefore, it is not at all controlled by man. Man cannot manipulate it. Man cannot accrete it or delete it or corrupt it. That's their position. That's their where their starting base. On academia, he's saying they don't start from that presuppositional base. Therefore, they will never accept the eternality of it. So therefore, everything is open to criticism. And if it's man-made, it's no longer eternal. So you can see that is true, and that is a problem. And he's aware of that. What he's going to do, but however, he's going to now stipulate that the same exists for the Hadith. No, it does not, because no one's stipulating that the Hadith is eternal. We're all starting from the premise that the Hadith, all Muslims and Christians and non-believers believe that the Hadith is written by men. It is not eternal. It is not in heaven. It is not on those eternal tablets. But he is assuming that the same problem exists with both genre of literature. No, they don't. That's where his first problem is. Are you following that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's continue on, because now he's going to unpack that a little bit more.
because I'm a graduate, this was the well-known reality, that the College of Hadith in the University of Medina in the 90s and the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they've changed it now. It was considered to be the most advanced study of Hadith at the undergraduate level in the entire world. And as somebody who went through that and has talked to other people from other institutes, I would very much agree with that, the amount of studying that we did. So what I'm trying to say is I've studied Hadith inside out. I have ijazat more than I do. I forgot how many I have. I have plenty of ijazat. And I've also studied the historical critical method. In fact, for a period of my life, my second year of Yale, before I decided Ibn Taymiyyah, I really wanted to write a PhD on the isnad analysis and basically a Muslim defense of it, which would have been utilizing the historical critical method. So anyway, my point being, I'm well aware. My preliminary conclusion, and please audience understand, I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. My preliminary conclusion is there is no middle ground. And historical critical method and isnad analysis are two diametrically opposed ways of looking at early Islam and reports, and I don't find much commonality between them as of yet. Obviously in small areas there, but overall, two diametrically opposed epistemologies. That having been said, therefore, one will have to navigate the religious side of things if you are a believing Sunni, Hadith believer, in a different epistemology. And when you are arguing in the academic world, you'll have to use a different epistemology. So in some areas, there's good, healthy overlap. In some areas, we'll politely agree to disagree. And in some areas, they're diametrically opposed. This is my preliminary analysis, and I would love to be proven wrong. And I would love for somebody to come and say, no, you are absolutely incorrect. And we can prove Hadith via the historical critical method. And this is how we do it. And I would literally thank that person and be the first to buy the book and love to see it. As of yet, though, I'm a little bit pessimistic and I don't see there to be much of a commonality. So we're going to have to simply say, if you believe in that the Sunnah has been preserved by the Hadith, you're going to have to follow a certain epistemology, a certain paradigm. And if you are, like, as you're aware, and you're an academic channel, right? You're well aware, nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim Sunni science of Hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited. I'm just being factual. I'm describing. I'm not saying which one is right or wrong. I'm just saying the max.
Did you want it?
Okay. That's all we need to hear. That's because now he's going to go into the Quran, because he's going to talk about a Western scholar who says, but he's not talking about the. He will let him do the next phrase, because maybe the next phrase is okay. Continue that.
No, we can listen. Maybe
Nicholas Sinai. He's going to talk about Nicholas Sinai. Just hear that one thing, and then we'll stop there, because this is
forget. Like Harold Motsky and others are going to say, well, we can say that some hadith definitely go back to some tabi'un. Mm-hmm. That's like the max you can say. As for definitively stating that the hadith go back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at this stage of my life, I will have to say, this is what I say as a believer, not as an academic. At this stage. And if somebody proves me wrong, then I would love to come across that and say, no, we can prove academically. Because here's the point. We can academically prove, by and large, the Prophet preached the Qur'an.
Okay, now he's going to go into the Quran. Okay, let's just stick with this thing that he's saying there. Are you following everything he said, Hatun?
Yes, I'm listening to Jay.
Okay, now, just to help the people out, what does he mean by isnad? Just help people what they're saying, what he's saying there.
Yeah, so when you grab a hadith, before it tells you what Muhammad said, before that it says, this person heard from this person heard from this person heard from this person. Those bunch of names are the isnad. So, and now we've got problem with it.
Okay, and we call that oral tradition. That's called oral tradition. So in other words, nothing was written down by any of those persons. Not one. It's hearsay. We call another word for it be hearsay, and that's the problem. And he knows that, and he has he's saying difficulty with that. Now, this is going to be the problem with the Quran. We're not talking about the Quran today. That's a whole nother subject, and let's just leave that to one side. The difficulty, and this is why he's coming up with it. Now, notice he says he belongs to the two schools. On this side, he was to the best school in the world in Medina, which is the best school of Hadith, and he got his scholarship there. Likewise, he was one of the best schools in the world when it comes to historical criticism, Yale University in America. So he's in both those two schools. So what he's saying is, I am really the authority on this very issue. That's what he's saying. Now, knowing that, that's probably why they brought him on board, because I would suggest in the English-speaking world, or any world, because there is nothing outside of the English-speaking world on historical criticism in Islam. You have to do it in English. It just doesn't exist in Arabic-speaking environment. So he is covering both bases as the best spokesman to be able to answer this question: what do you do with this Prophet Muhammad? What do you do with what he said and what he did, if we have no one there who heard what he said or saw what he did?
Yeah, so he's gonna say in a bit, I think in a minute, he's gonna say there is nothing we can chase that to Muhammad.
Well, he's already said that. He's already said there's nothing. He said the Tabi'un. He put the Tabi'un in. For those who don't know what the Tabi'un, they are the second generation after the Sahaba. The Sahaba are actually the eyewitnesses. Our equivalent in Christianity would be Matthew and John. The Tabi'un would be Mark and Luke. They're the ones that got it from the Sahaba. They weren't actually there watching it or knowing it, hearing Jesus speak, but they got it from those who did watch and hear what Jesus said. So we would have the same equivalent. Now, what he is saying is the Tabi'un, the second generation, would have known Muhammad. And I'm going to shut that down very quickly just by showing you some graphs. We're going to actually confront that notion that there were no Sahaba and there were no Tabi'un at all. We don't have anybody of that caliber. They are only in name only. These are nothing more than suppositions. But he still is of that mind that there may be some of those who were actually heard, who then pass it on to those who pass it on to other, who pass it on to another, and then finally was written down. He would say in the 9th and 10th century, we're going to shut that one down too. None of this comes from the 9th and 10th century. Okay, so that's the position he takes. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish the video. That part is talking, so Wardun can pick up that Muslim scholar is telling us actually is not going back to Muhammad. So let's just pull that again and then finish that part.
The words that we have today, the Uthmanic Mus'haf, that's like a solid given, right? The wordings of the Quran,
we can debunk that in a second.
Of course, believers, we said it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the academy has pretty much proven scientifically, I mean, through the historical method, that there's an Uthmanic Mus'haf. Yeah. That much is beyond reasonable doubt. And the fact that there's an Uthmanic Mus'haf, we're talking about senior companions all being alive, right? So by and large, the normative interpretation of the modern academy is that what the Quran claims to be, the wordings of the Quran, the preaching of the Quran, the teaching of the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ said them. This is the mainstream, and we can prove this. As of yet, I don't think we can do that to the Hadith literature. And we're just going to have to understand these are two different epistemologies. So when I become Sheikh Yasir and I go and preach and teach, I will quote Sahih Bukhari and I will quote Sahih Muslim and I will say, قال الله قال رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and that's the preacher. And I understand in the academy, I cannot quote Bukhari and this will be what the Prophet said. I understand this. So I'm just going to have to use a different, epistemology. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, we pause there. I think just, Jay, you need to make a comment on this so-called Utmanic Quran. Historians, Muslim scholars, as well as Muslim scholars, Simith tells us, actually, that Quran called Utmanic Quran has nothing to do with Uthman.
Yeah,
I don't want to break that news to Yasir Qadhi, but I think let me do that. Yes, Yasir Qadhi, so-called Utmanic Qurans has nothing to do with Uthman. They were written down way after Uthman was in hell. way after Uthman was in hell. That's a historical fact as of, it's been historical fact for a couple of years now.
And I'm going to help you out as a Turk, because you've always got on my case saying I'm always been dumping on the Turks. It's two Turkish scholars who are considered to be the world's authority on this very issue. One is Tahir Atakulic and the other one is Ekmelin Sanulu. Both of them have been very clear that there is no such thing as an Uthmanic recension. We don't have any Uthmanic Quran. I did a debate on this way back in 2014, and it's never been no Muslim has been able to shut me down on this. The 6 major manuscripts, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the whole Husseini, that's the Samarkand, and then with the Sana manuscript, every one of them are 8th and 9th century. Not one of them is a 7th century Quran. So that academia is very clear that none of those 6, the earliest ones, are Uthmanic. So he is saying something that no academic would say. Go ahead.
Okay, just a clarification for everyone to understand. So the Qurans, copy of the Qurans, which they are saying these are the Ottomanic Qurans, they have nothing to do with Uthman. That's a historical fact. Yasir Qadhi should know about it by now. I'm surprised that he doesn't know. So the problem right now in this interview, not the problem, the thing we concern is how he's putting the second hole in narrative is, now he's simply telling us, actually, we cannot trust the Hadith. Why? If you think about it, very practical level, without Hadith, they don't know how to walk, how to live, how to eat, how to pray. Muslims cannot be Muslim without Hadith. I shouldn't be the one who kind of encourages Muslims to follow the Hadith and the Quran, but without Hadith, no Islam. Without Hadith, no Islam. And Yasir Qadhi is simply telling us, actually, yeah, we cannot trace back Hadith to Muhammad, and there is no one historically says, yeah, this is trustworthy. They already discredit that. See the seriousty of that.
Yeah, basically you're saying it very well, and that is what they call the Sunnah of the Prophet, the example of the Prophet. How you're to walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep, what you're to do 24/7 has to come from the Sunnah. There's very little in the Quran on how to live, on what Muhammad did. Muhammad's only referred to 4 times, and those, all we now know, have nothing to do with Muhammad. So you can see the difficulty that Muslims are in. And this is why he is aware of this, and that's why he is caught between these two worlds. So you notice at the very end, he says, when I'm in the madrasa, I wear almost like he says, I wear a different cap, I wear a different gown, and I am an imam, and I say things, and I quote from the Bukhari, and I quote from Sahih Muslim.
But that's the same thing. I see that as a hypocrisy. He did exactly the same thing when it comes to the preservation of the Quran, Ahruf and the Qiraat thing. Like he said, if I'm teaching to these lay Muslims in the mosque, Quran has been perfectly preserved. If the knowledge of the student of knowledge comes to me, then yes, let's dig into the Ahruf, let's dig into the Quran, dig into the Qiraat. So that's called two faces. That's called hypocrisy, and it is dangerous and it is wrong.
Okay, now I just want to be careful that we don't come down too hard on Yasir, Dr. Qadhi, because in a sense, I understand what he is saying. We as Christians do the same thing. We talk about the miracles of Jesus Christ. And when we talk about the miracles, we start from presupposition that God does enter time and space and miracles do exist. When you go to academia, they don't believe in a God. They don't believe there's such a thing as miracles. So we have to talk 2 different languages depending on what crowd we're talking in. They understand, and a skeptic or a academic who doesn't accept miracles, doesn't accept that there is a God, doesn't accept that certainly any God would enter time and space. When we talk with them, we have to understand that, and we have to be aware of the fact that they don't start from our presuppositional base. In some ways, he's saying the same thing. He's saying, I wear one hat over here, and I quote from Bukhari, and I quote from Sahih Muslim, because all the people I'm talking to in the madrasa follow Bukhari and Muslim to know how to walk, talk, eat, drink, and sleep. He doesn't do that when he's in academia because none of them want to follow what they don't believe in Muhammad to begin with, and they don't believe that Bukhari or Muslim knows, and they don't follow. They don't need to know how to walk, talk, eat, and dream. So therefore, he is carrying two hats. So I want to be a little fair on Yasir Qadhi because we in Christianity we've followed the same difficulty. However, we don't make the claim he's making. What he is still saying is, I still believe in. There were people that were there who actually saw what Muhammad did and heard what Muhammad said. He's still claiming that. He just doesn't know if we can look at the 9 volumes of Bukhari today and claim that those are actually from the time of Muhammad. That's all he's saying. That's all he's willing to go on. But certainly there was a Muhammad, and certainly he did receive a Quran, and certainly a man named Uthman had the Quran finalized in 652. That's what he will not deter from. He will not go away from that. And that's the dilemma he's going to find. And so that's why he's saying what he did say. Nobody in academia on this side considers the traditions, the Hadith, the Tafsir, the Tahriq, and also the Sirah to be historically viable. But what he doesn't know is just how ahistorical they are. He's not even aware yet of just how much we now know on this side. So that's what he's not, because he's not aware of that. There are a lot of Christians, probably people who are listening to us, who aren't aware of what now the academics have found. Because we're finding an awful lot more than what he's even aware of. And what we're now finding is that these traditions that he claims could have come from the Tabi'un, the second generation, he's willing to say that much, of a man named Muhammad living in a place called Mecca, receiving a book called the Quran, which he's so sure was finalized by Uthman in a place called Medina. Isn't that interesting? In the place called Medina. He's willing to take that goal. What he doesn't realize is the reason he has to make that claim are coming from documents that are not from the 9th and 10th century, okay? They're from much, much later.
Well, you look at me, this is what you get. So with a philosopher or with a lay person, I will be the same. But yeah, Jay is making a case that it can change from one person to another person. Okay, so overall my take on is Yasir Qadhi was being asked very difficult question. He's like trying to deal with the question, and then in that, let me just read what he said because I did send that to you as a message. Hadith science is completely discredited. Definitely stating that Hadith go back to the Prophet at this stage of my life, I will have to say this is what I can say as a believer, not as an academic. So from looking from the historical side of it, from the academic side of it, he cannot trace back Hadith to Muhammad.
Yep.
And you've done lots of work on it. So I'm just like, I was so amazed that Yasir Qadhi is just like coming alongside of you and teaming up with you, Jay, supporting your findings.
And I think we don't need to go into all the material that I was going to go into tonight because I don't think we have time. What I will say is this.
So tell me, where do you want me to start?
I don't know. Let's not do that. Let's just forego the PowerPoint for now, okay? Because I think that will take too long. Unless do you want to go to the PowerPoint?
It's up to you. If you've got like
Okay, let's just go through it real quickly because he did say that we can at least trust that there were some Sabiyun and some Sahaba and some Tabi'un. Let's just go and look at that first. So let's go to slide number 24. Do you have it there on your?
Okay, so the way we are going to work on this slide is Jay will be in charge of the StreamYard. I will be in charge of the PowerPoints. So it's
okay.
24.
Let's start. No, start with slide number 23, the one right below. There you go. Now, go ahead and open that one up. Now, here's the problem with extant manuscripts, and it's this. When anybody asks Muslims how they can be sure that the story they have of Muhammad is true, they always point to numerous books. And I remember Farid, he used to do this. He would go up to say, Jay, you have no idea what you're talking about. I've got a book here. And he says, this is the Munabi. Over here is Maliki. He started pulling book from his shelf after shelf the book. Say, look, this is from Maliki. This is from Al-Taiba. This is from... He gives name after name. He gives, this is from Razak, this is from Hanbal, over here is Munabi, over here is Taylisi, and here is another one, here's Shaiba. And he just plays, and he says, these all predate Al-Bukhari, he was saying. In fact, they are part of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. So they were actually there. They saw what Muhammad did and they heard what Muhammad said, is what the claim he was making. Here's the problem. You will get Muslims doing this all the time. They always jump and they give name after name after name after name, and they know that you don't know who these people are, so therefore you're incredulous. You say, okay, they must know what they're talking about. Well, we decided to go back and look at every one of these, and the difficulty is this. Go ahead and hit the next animation. To be a valid witness for Muhammad, you need to have what these people who you claim are Sahaba and Tabi'un, you need to have their extant manuscripts. And I'm not just going to stop at the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. I'm going to also say also the Sirah writers and the Hadith writers and the Tafsir and the Tahqiq writers, all of them, all those 5 genera of what we know as the Islamic tradition, they have written something down, and we need to see where those manuscripts are that they wrote down. Okay, next, hit the next animation. Remember, the compilers of the Prophet's life and sayings all worked under the authority of the Muslim caliphs. So Hatun, what this means is the caliphs were very wealthy. They were living there in Medina. They have had all access. Remember, by the time you get to Muawiyah and by the time you get to Abdul Malik, you have from Spain all the way to India, and then you have Turkey all the way to Yemen under their control. They were the second biggest superpower of their day. You can't tell me that these were poor individuals. They were there in the courts of Damascus, and they were in the courts of Baghdad later on, especially with the Abbasids later on, where all these writers were, because the writers we're going to talk about, Hisham and Al-Waqidi and Bukhari and Muslim and all of the Hadith writers, and then of course Al-Tabari, they were all in the courts of Baghdad. Baghdad is where the caliph lived, and these guys had wealth seeping out of their pores. So they were not dependent on papyrus like our early church fathers were. The early church fathers, when they were, or those who were writing the gospel accounts, they were not very rich, they were not wealthy, they wrote on papyrus, which are these interlocking leaves. These guys all wrote on parchment and on vellum. Look at the earliest manuscripts, the ones we just talked about, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitanus, the Husseini, and the Sana'a manuscript. They're all on parchment, animal skins. Animal skins are durable. So the Muslim written text should still be in existence even today, because we're only talking about, my goodness, we're talking only 1,200 years, 1,100 years ago. Or the earliest ones would be 1,400 years later. Consequently, there is no excuse not to have the original manuscript for any of these Sahaba or the Tabi'un or the Sirah. So let's hit the bar one more time, because the next...
Also, remember, like there was a persecution for Christians versus Muslims were the one who were persecuting. So that's another excuse, another reason that they have no excuse to not have their manuscripts in full form.
Absolutely. You have the Edict of Diocletian. You have the enormous amount of persecution where they went and actually destroyed most of the manuscripts of the Bible in 300 AD. This you don't have. And that's why, be careful, Muslims. If you're going to make this claim, then you've got to be able to put up or shut up. And so they're making this claim that we do have these manuscripts. So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at the extant manuscripts for each of these. The Sirah, which is the biography of Muhammad, the Hadith, which Yasir Qadhi is talking about, that's the sayings, the Sahaba codices, which are the companions of the Prophet, the Tabi'un codices, which are the second generation, as well as the Tahqiq, his history, and the Tafsir, his commentary. Go ahead and let's hit the next slide. So this slide now, we're going to go and we're going to talk about the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. These are the first generation that they claim. These are the eyewitnesses, or you would call them the companions of the Prophet. And then the Tabi'un would be those who received what they knew from the Sahaba. Now, what they claim is, and this is what Farid and all the others are claiming, that these guys, these names are all people that actually were there with Muhammad. They were the companions of the Prophet. They heard him. They saw him. And let's go look at their names. So let's go ahead, and that's the claim they make. They also, therefore, they are all from the 7th, possibly the 8th if they're Tabi'un, but they're from the 7th century. That's a lie. Let's look at them. The Muwatta of Ibn Malik, that is actually first, and I'm going to confront this later on. The earliest manuscript we have for anything by Malik is he didn't live until the 9th century. He did not live in the 7th century. Let's look at the next one. The Sahifa of Haman ibn Munabi. He was from the 12th century, not from the 7th century. That's 500 years later. Go ahead, the next one. This is the Musnad of Ibn Halbal, 13th century. That's 600 years later. The next one. Same with Musanaf Abdul Razak, 13th century. Next one. the Musnad of Al-Tailisi, and then the last one, Abi Shaiba. This is also 13th century. Notice, these documents were all supposedly created in the 7th century by these guys living in the 7th century, yet we don't have any documentation until the 9th to 13th century. Thus, from 2 to 600 years too late. Okay, hit it again. This suggests that they were all written by others hundreds of years later. Consequently, they are all redacted attributions. Now, I want to go to the next slide, because the next slide then puts up unless it shows it visually. Okay, so now just start hit it one time and just look and see all these names. Just hit it once. There's all the names. Okay, so Muwatta ibn Malik, Sahifa of Munabi, then Hanbal, Razak, Tailisi, Shaiba. They are all claimed to be in that time period, but they're not. Go ahead. The first one is Malik, that's 9th century, the Munabi 12th, then you come Hanbal, 13th century, also Razak, 13th century, Tailisi, 13th century, and Shaiba, 13th century. Look, so let's go ahead, hit it again. Get rid of those guys. They did not come from there. They came from the 9th to the 13th century, all right? So they're 200 to 600 years late. There it is visually. You can see it on a timeline. Now, hit the next slide, because I'm going to even confront that 9th century guy, okay? I'm going to confront with the Muwatta ibn Malik, because right now they're now claiming, and it's all over the internet, Jay, but what about the Muwatta ibn Malik? Okay, go ahead, hit it. There, let's look at this. There is a partial copy of the Muwatta of Ibn Malik, which is in Dublin's Chester Beatty Library from manuscript 3001, is described as the second third of a celebrated treatise on Islamic prudence, dated to 890. However, it's the second or third. That means 2/3 of it's missing. Only a third of it is there. The oldest complete manuscript of the Muwatta, currently known, dated to 1030 AD. So that is 10th century. Sorry, that is 11th century. Did I say 10th century? The earliest complete copy of the Muwatta is from the 11th century. In other words, go ahead, hit it again. The Muwatta that we have today is from the 11th century. But hold it, hit it one more time. The problem is, why are we even talking about the Muwatta? The Muwatta is only about the rules of jurisprudence and not about early Islam. So it does not help us with anything to do about the historical data on how Islam actually began or who Muhammad was. This also explains why the Muwatta is never included in one of the major Islamic traditions, because it's a completely different genre. It's not the genre we need on early Islam. So now let's go back to go hit it again. Let's go back to the timeline and let's go and do this again. But there we have, let's go put up all the claims that they make. There they all are, Muwatta, and there's that's right, the Muwatta, and then you have all the other ones, the other 6. We now know, and we think, go ahead, hit it again. They say it's there, but no, it's actually, hit it again. The Muwatta of Ibn Malik, it comes from there. So let's hit it again. Let's get rid of that guy. None of them should be there. So all of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un do not come from the 7th century. They start to appear from the 11th century up until the 13th century. That's 400 to 600 years too late. Now, hear what I'm saying, Hatun. I'm not saying that that was the first time that these guys ever wrote down. I'm saying that's all we have in our hands today, which means there could have been someone named Ibn Malik who is earlier. There could have been someone named any one of these characters who were earlier, but we have nothing written by them from their time period. So therefore, we can't even know whether or not any of them lived, or any of the material that we're looking at comes from them. Now let's go to the next genre, which is the Sirah. Let's continue on. And I think you know this one pretty well. Who really wrote that book there? That's the book we have to read. That's the book you've had to read. This is the one that's the standard work that's already done. Go ahead, hit it. The person who actually put this together was a guy, go ahead and hit it again, the guy named, and there it is, Heinrich Ferdinand Wustenfeld from Germany, who between 1858 to 1860, he then put together this Sirah. Okay, hit it again. Now, that Sirah is written, that everybody Muslims are dependent on, is written by a German linguist who wrote Muhammad's story 160 years ago. However, where did he get his material from? Let's go ahead and look at the next slide. This is what we now know from what the scholars have told us, and this is what the Germans are telling us. What we know is go ahead, hit it. The first manuscript that they claim that gives us the life of Muhammad comes from those two guys. This is what the Muslims claim. It comes from Ibn Hisham and al-Waqidi. Okay. What we now know is that this guy, German guy, is the one that put the biography of Muhammad together, published it in 1860, but he got his material, go and hit it. He got it from this one, this in Fez, which is dated, and I want to get this right, that is 1067. And the next one,
1063.
Did I say 1067? I meant 1063. The next one he got from the British Library in London, which is 1278. The next one is the Bodleian manuscript, which is 1324. And then the Chester Beatty manuscript in Dublin, which is 1331, followed by the Parisian Bibliothèque Nationale de France de Paris, which is 1420. And then the last one, and probably the most important one, is from the SOAS Library there in London from 1589. So we took those 6 manuscripts between 1858 and 1860, that 2-year period, and he just grabbed what he wanted and put it together 160 years ago. But here's what's interesting. The oldest one, the 1063 from Fez, he only used 25% of, throughout 75%, because he did not consider it to be important. Showing you that, and let's go ahead and throw out those other guys, hit it one more time. Goodbye, don't need them anymore. So everything we know about the biography of Muhammad starts to appear in the 11th century up until the 16th century. Go ahead, hit it one more time. So here's my conclusion for the Sirah. Every Western and Muslim scholar believes that the Sirah compilation was just 200 to 300 years after Muhammad, which is bad enough. That's what Yasir Qadhi is saying. He said, look at, okay, so it's 9th and 10th century. We don't have 7th century. What he doesn't know, and he'll be surprised to find out that they are really much later, between the 11th and 19th century. In other words, between 400 to 1200 years after Muhammad. Yasir Qadhi doesn't even know this yet. So he's going to have to stumble even more. Now let's go to the next genre, because the next genre would be the Hadith himself. Now we're hitting the Hadith that he's talking about. Who really created what he calls the 9th and 10th century Hadith? And he claims it's all 9th and 10th century. That is incorrect. Go ahead, hit the first one. Abu Dawud actually comes from the 11th century. That's 400 years later. An-Nasai comes from the 12th century. That's 500 years later. Ibn Majah comes from the 13th century. That's 600 years. Jami' at-Tirmidhi comes from the 14th century. That's 700 years later. Sahih Muslim, look at this. The second most important comes from the 14th century. That's 700 years later. And Sahih Bukhari, the most important, the most prolific, the one that has 9 volumes, is from the 14th to 15th century. That's 700 to 800 years. Go ahead, hit the conclusion. The conclusion is not one of these Hadith compilers, these 6 compilers, is from the 9th and 10th century, not their manuscripts. They may have been living there, but we don't have their manuscripts from their time period. They all were created way as late as the 11th to 15th century, which is 400 to 800 years too late. Okay, let's put that on a time.
Yeah, I just want to point out something for the listeners who are going to use these things in their evangelism. If you picked it up, most reliable hadith by Muslims, according to Muslims, are the Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. But how many years they are after Muhammad? 700 to 800 years. They are the most reliable one. Think about the gap. That's mind-blowing. And canonization of current Sahih Bukhari is from 1800s. You've got manuscripts, little bit of that, but whole canonization is from 1800s. It's just those numbers. Most of times you think, oh, they are just numbers, but in here, those very big gaps, very big.
Okay, let's just show it on it. Let's show it on the timeline. Look at the next slide. And you're going to put this on a timeline like we did with the Sahaba and the Tabune in the Sirah.
I like your PowerPoints. They look they're very well done.
Thank you very much. Those are the 6 that they claim. Now, notice they're very close. They're 9th and 10th century. And that's what Yasir Qadhi is talking about. That's why he says we cannot trust it, because it's the 9th and 10th century. But he has no idea of he has no idea of how erroneous that statement is. None of them. We can't find any of them. They start to appear in the 11th century with Abu Dawud, 12th century for An-Nasai, 13th century for Ibn Majah, 14th century for Tirmidhi, 14th century for Sahih Muslim, and most importantly, 14th and 15th century for Al-Bukhari. And as you said, Hatun, that's why I put them in a little bit bolder type. They are by far the most important. Notice they are according to their tradition, they are the first, right? The first 2 are Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. actually, as far as extant manuscript is concerned, as far as history is concerned, they are the two last. Now can you see why they are the first? Because they have been accreted and changed and manipulated and corrupted and redone, not just from 200, 300 years later, over, in this case, 400 to 800 years later. In this case, 700 to 800. It took them 700 to 800 to get Muslim and Bukhari correct. Okay, let's go ahead and put the conclusion up, which is the conclusion I'm saying. Conclusion, as you can see, every Western and Muslim scholar believes the Hadith compilations were just 200 to 300 years old. That's bad enough. And that's where Yasir Qadhi is having a problem. That's where his dilemma is. What will he say when he finally finds out that they are really much more recent, between the 11th and 15th century? In other words, between 400 to 800 years too late. Okay, so that is the Hadith that he's referring to. Now let's finish with the Tariq and the Tafsir, because most Muslims love the Tariq and the Tafsir more than anything else. And the reason why is because Al-Tabari that you have there, he's the guy that supposedly wrote it down in the 10th century. And he is the one that takes everything that everybody says, puts it out there, and it's all contradictory. And you can there sit and choose which one you want, what you want to, whatever fits your paradigm, you just grab it because Al-Tabari said so from the 10th century. That's what we've been told. No, no, no. Go ahead. The edition of Al-Tabari, which everyone uses today, was compiled by a Michael Jean de Geuge, the professor of Arabic at Leiden University, Holland, between 1879 and 1901, and is known as the Leiden edition. Actually, I've misspelled his name. It should be Goeje. Go ahead and hit the next box. I got it correct there, I think. Yeah. This de Geuge used two 13th century Arabic manuscripts from Turkey as his model. These were written 600 years too late. So conclusion, even Al-Tabari's Tariq and his Tafsir are not 10th century originals, but are much later 13th century compilations, which were merely attributed, in other words, redacted back to Al-Tabari 300 years earlier. Yet they are still 600 years too late. What's more, it took a Dutch scholar to compile them 1,200 years later. Now we're going to do this all together in one slide. You ready? Let's put it all together in one slide. Here we go.
Wanted to point out another spelling mistakes. Istanbul Köprülü. So there is no I at the end. Okay, take that out.
Oh, okay. It's Topkaplu.
Köprülü.
Thank you. I should have had you go over this before I put it up there. You need to know that. Okay, next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So, an overview. Let's start with the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. There's the Sahaba. That's what they claim. But no, let's go and find out when they actually come. Let's hit it. They claim they're the Maliki is there, but he's not. Throw him out of the way. Get him out of the way. And you can see that's 11th and 12th and 13th and 13th and 13th. So, goodbye to the Sahaba and Tabi'un. There are no Sahaba and Tabi'un. Bye-bye. Now, let's go to the next one, which would be the Sirah. You know, the Hadith. The Hadith, there's a 6 compilation that they claim. That's what they claim. But no, let's see when the Hadith actually get put together. They start with Ibn Dawud, and then you have, it's very small here. I can't read it, but you can probably read it better than me.
Yeah,
you can
so
have
for the Hadith, you've got Abu Dawud from 11th century, Al-Nisai 12th century, Ibn Majah 13th century, Al-Tirmidhi 14th century, Sahih Muslim 14th century, Al-Bukhari 14th to 15th centuries.
Okay, so let's get rid of the 5, 6 that they claim are there. Bye-bye. We don't want you anymore. And now we go to the Sirah, and that's what they claim. Ibn Hisham al-Waqidi from the 9th century. No, not at all. They start to appear in 1063 with the Fez. Then you have the 1278 with the British Library. Then the 1324 with the Bodleian Library. Then you have the 1331 in Dublin, Ireland, and the BNF one in 1420. And then you have the SOAS one in London in 1589. However, put together by this character, Woestdenfeld, in 1860. That's the 19th century. So goodbye to Hisham and Waqidi. We don't need them anymore. Now we go to, then we end off with the Tafsir and the Tahriq, supposedly by this guy, Al-Tabari. No, they are actually come from 2 manuscripts that are there. That Köprülü,
Istanbul Köprülü from 1041. That's 13th century, 1253, 1244.
So that's 13th century, but to get put together by this character, this Dutch guy who's living between 1879 and 1901. So that's the last century that he actually writes al-Tabari and redacts it back to the 10th century. So get rid of the Tabari in 10th century. Goodbye. We don't need him anymore. And what do we now know? Everything, go ahead, hit it once more. So everything the Muslims claim comes from that time period there, right? What we're finding, it comes from that time period. I'm going to put a red wall right there between them. So everything to the left side of that red wall is a big X. Nothing at all exists from that time period. And our conclusion, we've been told that the stories surrounding Muhammad's life were written by those who saw and heard him, thus by eyewitnesses or by others within a few generations. Yet we see above that everything we know about this man Muhammad, how Islam began, the origins of Islam, were originally created 400 to 9 years after he presumably lived, yet was not canonized in most of the respects until 13 to 1200 years later, suggesting it is all a fraud. Okay, you got it all in one go.
So then what we have here is simply when Yasir Qadhi says, actually, we cannot trace Hadith back to Muhammad, he is simply correct.
That's true, but he has no idea just how true he is saying that. And that's why, listen, what we're showing you, no one really has heard before, because we're the first. Dr. Pat Andrews is the one that put this all together. It took him 2 years to go through and find every one of these manuscripts. Now, let me just say something here before I go on, because I know people are going to shut back and say, hold on a minute. Are you trying to say that there was no al-Bukhari, there was no Muslim, there was nobody living in Baghdad or Ibn Hisham? No, I'm not saying this. I'm not saying this. There could very well, and I would have no difficulty with believing that Muhammad, that by the time the Abbasids, these are all Abbasid periods. Remember, 9th and 10th century is Abbasid. By the time of the 8th century, there was already a well-recognized group of people who believed Muhammad was a prophet, who believed Muhammad received a Qur'an, and who believed that Muhammad lived in Mecca. So by the time of the mid-8th century, that was well delegated. The difficulty is, once you put a man named Muhammad, who received a book of the Quran in that city called Mecca and that other city called Medina. Once you say that, you've got to have documentation to support that. You need a backstory. You need to create the traditions that fill that out. And also, once you have because by that time the Quran was the Quran did exist. I have no doubt the Quran existed by the mid-8th century, by the time the Abbasids come to power and move the headquarters from Damascus down to Baghdad. Once they're in Baghdad, they then have to create a backstory. That's why you have Ibn Ishaq writing the first biography in around 765. But what he wrote is not anything that was written down, because then it had to get manipulated for 70 years until Ibn Hisham wrote it down. But then when what Ibn Hisham wrote it got manipulated, and the first document we have of Ibn Hisham doesn't appear till the 11th century. And continues to the 13th, 14th, all the way up into the 16th century. So all of those we need to look together. Even Wustenfeld, when he was looking at what Ibn Hisham supposedly wrote, he refused to accept the earliest one, which is the Fed manuscript, and he threw out 75% of it, showing that even at the 11th century, by this time, the later Abbasid period, they still hadn't put together Muhammad's story. And this got then created and deleted and created and deleted until it was finally put together by a German scholar 160 years ago. Isn't it interesting? A European had to do the job for them. Now, that's all we're saying. That's all I'm saying here. I'm not saying that these people did not exist. What I'm saying is, once they had chosen their prophet, who was in contradistinction to the earlier prophets and who was you might say, in competition to the person of Jesus Christ from Christianity, because that was their other big superpower of the day. The Byzantines were their big superpower. They then had to create where this man lived, what he did, what he said. They had to create it. And what they did is, it took not just a 9th and 10th century to do that. It took them actually 400 to 900 years to do that. And what tends to happen is, especially now we can understand why Bukhari and Muslim are so late, because they are the most comprehensive. And they are then introduced as the earliest. So therefore, whenever you are, and again, I'm going to come back on you again as a Turk, especially during the Ottoman period, the Ottomans needed to have an awful lot of new material. They had to have new laws. They had to have new institutions. In order to do that, to have these laws and institutions, you needed to give credit to Muhammad. Because once you give credit to Muhammad, then it sticks. And once you do that, you don't have to really argue it. It takes authority of its own. So that's why these sayings of Muhammad became so important. That's why the Hadith became so important. That's why they had to get manipulated and accreted as new rulers, new caliphs needed new laws, needed new institutions to support what they needed, what they were doing. They put it in the pen, or they put it in the name of Ibn Hisham, or in the name, in the case of the Hadith, a name of Bukhari or Muslim or Majah or Nisai or the other of the six. Can you see why this has happened over hundreds of years? We do the same thing in Christianity. Notice, we have lots of Gnostic writings who would write the story of Jesus, especially as a child. And they would write what Jesus did as a child, that he took some clay, formed them into birds, blew on them, and they flew up into the air. Or that his mother was hungry and he had ordered a tree to bend down to give he and his mother fruit. Or that he spoke from the cradle. These are many stories about Jesus' infancy. And they're called the infancy gospels of Jesus Christ. And they are all written in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. You have the Gospel of Thomas. You have the Gospel of Judas. You have the Gospel of Barnabas, one of the most famous ones. You know that one very well, Hatun, the Gospel of Barnabas, who all support and suggest that Jesus was a Muslim. And you can see when you read it that these were not written by anybody living in the 1st century. Well, the Gospel of Barnabas has Nazareth way up in the mountains. Has Nazareth on the Sea of Capernaum. And it has Capernaum way up in the mountains where Nazareth should be. It confuses those two cities. So whoever wrote the Gospel of Barnabas did not live in Israel at all. And now we know that it comes from a Spanish manuscript, which was written in 1634. That's the 17th century, redacted back to one of the companion of Paul. So what you do is, whenever you want something that is important, you want a new law, a new institution, you put the name of someone who is a Sahaba or someone who was a Tabi'un of Muhammad. You put their name on it, and therefore it gives, saying that this is what Muhammad said, this is what Muhammad did, we were right there, we saw what he did, we heard what he said, and therefore we can have authority. And in a sense, that's what Yasir Qadhi was saying tonight. He was saying, I don't have to have the original manuscripts. I knew Muhammad said this, and I know that Muhammad did this. And when I'm in the mosque and I'm in the madrasa, I put that cap on, and I refer, and you heard him say that. I there quote what Muslim said and what
Prophet said.
But when I come to academia, I don't do that, because I know these guys are skeptical. So therefore, I wear a different cap, and I have to say, yes, we understand that you don't believe these guys said that. You don't believe that Muhammad said that, but I do. So he wears two different caps. He has to speak two different languages. Unfortunately for him, he has therefore gone to the latest traditions and called them to be the most authoritative. In Christianity, we don't go to the latest traditions. We throw them out. That's why we don't go to the Gospel of Thomas. We don't go to the Gospel of Judas. And we certainly don't go to the Gospel of Barnabas. They're all written too late. We go to the earliest material, that which are written by the Sahaba and by the Tabi'un. The Sahaba being Matthew and John, and the Tabi'un being Mark and Luke. We go to the original the original writers, because they were there watching what Jesus did and hearing what Jesus said. So can you see, in some ways, we're completely on opposite poles from Yasir Qadhi. And thank God we don't have to have this argument. And thank God we don't, therefore, have to rely on documents that are, in this case, 400 to 900 years so too late.
So what I'm taking on from this live stream is, academically, when Yasir Qadhi puts his academic hat, he agrees that Hadith is not historical and cannot be reliable. He's not up to date with the dates and manuscripts, all that, but overall he kind of supports the argument that we cannot trust what Muhammad said academically. But from his just putting Muslim cap, taking out the history out of his mind, when he's preaching in the mosques, when he's preaching in Islamic schools or in Muslim conferences, he kind of just go for it.
Okay. Here's the next thing. Now, Hatun, here's where the rubber hits the road. What is the next time that Yasir Qadhi goes to academia? Okay, he's over here and he goes back to Yale University, and he has a talk at Yale University, his alma mater. What happens when someone raises their hand and they say, okay, Yasir Qadhi, so you do believe Muhammad did this and said this and received this and was living here. You believe this. Prove it. Prove it. Give me one reference to your prophet, Muhammad, saying or doing anything in the 7th century in Mecca receiving this book called the Quran before 632. Prove it. Give me one reference. What is he going to do then? Can you see? This is the dilemma for him. He doesn't want to step on their toes. And to date, no one has asked that of him yet. Because no one will ask that of him yet. There is, and in some ways, there is a red line of things that we don't ask Muslims. Whereas from Christians, we've been asked that for 200 years. We had to answer that question way back in the 1800s. Wellhausen asked that question. How can you believe that Jesus said this and did these things? Where is your reference point? Where is your document? And for 200 years, we've had to answer that question and find the documents and find. But here's the great thing. When Jesus did something or when Jesus said something, it's not just the gospel writers that write about it. Others from outside write about it. No one is in doubt that Jesus was historical. I don't know of any document. The most ardent atheist is not in doubt that Jesus did exist. No one's in doubt that there's a city called Jerusalem. No one's in doubt that Jesus died on the cross. The doubt there is whether he rose from the dead. That is really where it only comes from, because no one really suggests that Jesus was not on the cross. So can you see when we talk about Jesus historically on both sides? So we also have our academia and we also have our churches or our seminaries over here and our churches. In seminary, when we talk about Jesus historically, when we talk about what he said and what he did, our hadith and our tafsir, our sirah of what he did and our hadith, what he said, we pretty well can trust it because we know that on this side, we don't carry two caps. We don't carry two caps. When it comes to the historicity of Jesus and what he said and did, we are absolutely assured, not just because we can trust the accounts of the eyewitnesses and the Tabi'un, the Johns and the Marks and the Matthews and the Lukes, but we can also trust the historians that were there at that time, like Tacitus and like Josephus and like Thales and like Phlegon. Now, many people say, oh, yes, but those are much later writers. Listen, is there anybody that doubts that Jesus died on the cross? Can you show me anybody that doubts that? And can you prove it from the 7th century that there's some doubt for that? You can't. So that's why that is not in doubt. Is there any doubt that the place called Jerusalem did exist in the 1st century? Sorry, did I say 7th century? I meant 1st century. Okay. No one doubts those historical acts, and no one doubts what actually happened in the 1st century. When Yasir Qadhi makes the same statement about this man named Muhammad living in a place called Mecca and receiving a book called the Quran before 632, everybody just needs to ask the same question that was asked of us. Prove it. 2 words. Prove it. But using evidence from the 7th century. You can see he has yet to answer that question. That's the one he will not answer. And that's why in some ways, he's tiptoeing around this, because he knows that he won't be able to answer that one.
So what I'm picking up from you is you are saying history and Bible works together. There's no contradiction between them. And you are saying, well, Yasir Qadhi is having these red lines that he cannot cross when it comes to the history versus tradition. I remember
he went much further. He went much further than that. Look at the word he said. He said, nobody in academia affirms the Sunni-Muslim science of Hadith. It is considered to be completely discredited. He's completely thrown under the bus. He's thrown the Hadith under the bus a week ago. And he has to do that because he's trying to hold both cats. And you cannot do that as a Muslim. There just is no one that credibly believes in the Hadith anymore. And when he's saying the Hadith, he means the Sirah, the Hadith, the Tafsir, and the Tariq, all 4 genres. I mean, this is huge and significant, Hatun. That's why you put a video up. That's why we're doing this video now. That's why Chris has put his video up, and I hope many other people put their video up. They need to really jump on this. It's only a week old, and we're now finding the greatest scholar in Islam today, the one who stands in both camps. He has been in Medina, and he has studied at the best in the world, as he said, the best place to study Hadith in the world on this side. And he's also studied in Yale University, one of the best. I'm not saying it's the best, but one of the best institutions to study historical criticism, who now it realizes that these people completely discredit what these people say. And therefore, he has to wear 2 caps depending on who he's talking to, because he cannot take what he knows here and bring it over here, because they just will not accept it. And he knows it.
there is no way to compromise it.
You can't compromise in academia. That's the beauty of it.
I've got a couple of super chats and questions and comments. I'm going to bring them up to you, Jay. But I just, this 11th century is close to the Crusades. The Crusades followed invasion by the Turks. What part did Turks play in spreading Islam?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the 11th century. That's not my area of expertise. And as far as Turks, I'm going to let you answer that, Hatun, since you're a Turk yourself.
Well, I don't know what part they played spreading Islam, but every country, every state they went to conquer or share life, they took the Quran with them, and then it was their intention to kind of put the Quran in. Actually, same. I think it's the same. No, not in this one actually. Yeah, it's in the same video. This very video which we listened. Or maybe another video. Okay, there is like so Ottomans by Muslims are actually Ottomans by other Muslims are identified as pagans, the way they were following Islam. So they were identified as disbelievers. That's such a strange thing. But yeah, the way you kind of take your sword, go to the next country, you conquer them, you bring your Quran, you leave your Quran there. That's actually why one of the reasons why in Egypt they picked Hafs Quran, because when Ottomans conquered the lands, they kind of they forced the Hafs Quran. So that's kind of majority of the groups. Thank you very much for your generosity on that. How can we really know the truth when the original Quran were burned?
Okay, and Paulo, the way to answer that is look at the whole story. The whole story says the original Qurans plural were burned, but the one that was created by Uthman, Caliph Uthman, 5 copies were made. Some say maybe as many as 10. I know, Hatun, you've had that theory as for some time. There's anywhere between 5 and 7 and 10, 9 copies were made and sent to 5 and 9 cities, to Mecca, Medina, Basra, Baghdad was called Kufa back then, and then Damascus. Where are any of those 5? So that's the more bigger question. Whatever Qurans he burnt, which is really interesting, because Muslims today say he burned it because of dialectical difference. You can't have dialectical differences in a written text in the 7th century, because in order to have dialectical differences, you have to have the vowelization. The Dhamma, the Kasr, and the Fatha, those never existed in the 7th century. So there would be no difference in the dialectical, in any dialectical differences in a written text. So you can see that this is all material written by Al-Bukhari. Remember, this whole story about the burning of the Qurans comes from Al-Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, Hadith number 509 and 510. As we now know, that was finalized in its final form in the 14th and 15th century, redacted back to the 7th century. So Paulo, whether he burned the Quran or didn't burn the Quran, I don't even think he had anything to do with it. I don't think there was an Uthman. We can't find any reference to Umar or Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman or Ali and any of these caliphs in the 7th century, and certainly not having their caliphal courts in a place called Yathrib, which at that time, when it only had 200 people. How do you create an empire made out of 200 people?
Just to point out something for the evangelism purposes, I hope everyone picked up. So Jay is making a point. Actually, we don't even know, according to Islamic tradition, how many copies are made, because Islamic tradition is disagree from one group to other group. So you've got writings are stating there are 9 copies were made, versus you've got writings are stating there were 6 copies were made. So you've got to pick whichever you want to go. And thank you for your generosity. And Romans have account of Christians and Jews in the history, but nothing about Muslims. So in historical context, Jesus could never have been a Muslim or anyone else. 600 years later, 1st century Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, Coltrane, you're making a valid point, and that is nobody. There were no Muslims, but Muslims will say that Jesus was a Muslim. I think that's what he's referring to here, or he's referring that Muslims claim that he was a Muslim. How can he claim the word Muslim when that word hadn't even been invented? In fact, even in the 7th century, that we can't find that word Muslim or the word Islam. We can't find in any documentation from the 7th century. That only starts to appear in 730 on the inscriptions, and that's well into the 8th century.
And
so Jesus was never a Muslim.
Also helpful to remember, Jesus was very bad Muslim. Jesus was very bad Muslim, claiming to be the Son of God, not claiming, but putting in practice and dying on the cross for us. He was very, very bad Muslim. Calling God his father, he was very bad Muslim. Without lies, Islam dies. Thank you very much for your generosity. Okay, so what is our takeaway, Jay?
Well, I think our
We
takeaway
dig more.
is
As we dig more, we get more problems. It gets more messy.
yeah, we're watching the attrition of Islam right before our eyes. We're watching the best and the brightest. Yasir Qadhi, he is the best and the brightest that Islam has to offer in the English speaking language, and I would suggest in the world, because really these kind of discussions are only happening in English. You won't find these kind of discussions in Arabic, because it would not be very healthy to have these kind of discussions in Arabic. And remember, the Arabic speaking world is a very small part of Islam. It's only 15%, some say maybe as high as 20% of all Muslims. The vast majority of Muslims, 85 to 80% of all Muslims, are arguing and discussing all this material in English because it's the international language. So interestingly, if he is the best scholar they have in this area, and I would suggest he is superior to Yasir Qadhi, to Shabir Ali. He is superior to anybody else I know who is, because of the fact that he's been in both worlds. Shabir Ali used to be. I think Shabir Ali was up there because of the fact that he had got his doctorate there at Toronto University, but he doesn't have the following, nor does he have he doesn't have I don't think he has the ability that Yasir Qadhi does. Yasir Qadhi commands an awful lot more respect. So we're talking and we're getting from him, and that's why it's important that we're finding what he is saying. And what he did a week ago was a huge admission, similar to what he did on June 8th, 2020, 5 years ago, almost 5 years and a month ago, where he said that the standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. And when he said that, you picked up on that, and everybody since that time started talking about hole after hole after hole. Well, here's another hole. And this is a big one, because he is now agreeing with Mohammed bin Salman, the head of Saudi Arabia, who said 3 years ago that we must be careful about the traditions. And what we must use as our constitution is the Qur'an. He became a Qur'an only. If there's anything there in the traditions that disagrees with the Qur'an, we throw out those traditions.
And mutawata hadiths, yeah. Well, I'm keeping my eyes open, my ears open to see what Muslims are gonna say. You just give them mic and camera, they just say things, kind of causes destruction of Islam. In a sense, it is good. It is good days.
Now, to be fair, this is a historical critique. This is my area of expertise. That's why you've brought me on board for this. While this is important, and this is important mainly in academic circles, the same time, there are still almost 2 billion Muslims that do believe Muhammad did live, that he did say these things, and he did do these things, and that they are also to say and do the same things he said and did. So because of that, we still need to confront that Muhammad. And that's what you're doing, Hatun, and that's what many other people are doing. Don't stop confronting the Muhammad that the Muslims follow. We've got to continue doing that. I did it for 30 years. I'm no longer doing that because I'm spending so much time on this material, on the historical critique. But the rest of you realize there are two different ways to battle this. Look at the Muhammad that the Muslims go to, the Muhammad of the madrasas, the Muhammad of Islam, and just look at how irrelevant he is, how hopeless a model he is for the 21st century. Meanwhile, some of us are over here. And when you look over here at this side, looking and saying that he just didn't even exist, so why are we wasting our time? We do need to that battle as well. But this is more of an academic battle. This is more for the makers and shakers, the ones who are going to be using this in the future. It's also, this material is much better in places like Africa, in places, especially in Nigeria. They like it in Nigeria because it is not Islamophobic and it's not hate speech. Whereas many people believe this material that we're throwing at Muhammad, his misogyny and the violence and all the sexual proclivities that he had, that this is very full of mockery and hate. So be careful how you use it, but be aware you need both. We need both of these polemics simultaneously. And so that's why Hatun and I work hand in hand, because of the fact she's much better at the former, I'm much better at the latter.
And those of you who are kind of confused, which one should I follow? Where do I stand? Where do we stand in evangelism? Tomorrow, I do have Tony from Radical Truth. He's going to kind of come to the live stream and then give us an alternatives, how Christians kind of hold their position while there is a view of Muhammad existed or he didn't exist, how we do handle that. And on Friday, I have Titan TV will join me and Jay, where Titan TV is going to make a case why he believes Muhammad does not exist. So there are lots of things are coming out. Keep eye on and keep ear on everything. Jay, thank you very much for joining
Thank
me.
you.
I know it's very late in every part of the world. So hopefully I'll see you on Friday. And thank you very much, everyone who joined us in the chat. Please like, share, comment. I heard from Mohammed Hijab that comments are the one next videos circulate. So do those kind of things. I'll see you tomorrow for another live stream. God bless you all. Thank you, Jay.
Bye-bye.